Maya stepped into the house earlier than usual, her arms full of grocery bags, the quiet unusually heavy. There was a faint sound coming from down the hall, muffled, rhythmic. She thought Zion might be gaming with his friends, his door always half shut when he wanted privacy. Without thinking, she nudged it open with her shoulder, ready to tell him to help unload. The sudden movement startled him. He slammed his laptop lid so fast it rattled, his posture stiff, eyes wide like a cornered animal. She caught just enough before the screen disappeared. A paused video, hands moving over a woman's body, no faces, just skin and motion. But what lodged in her mind wasn't the act, it was the setting. A patterned sheet she knew too well, a headboard with a chip on the right side, and a wall with a faint shadowy stain in the exact same spot as theirs. Her voice came out more controlled than she felt. What was that? Nothing, Zion muttered, his cheeks flushed, avoiding her gaze. Just random, found it online. He shifted in his chair like his skin didn't fit right. Maya straightened, setting the groceries down on his desk without caring about bruising the apples. You know what I've told you about this kind of thing, she said, though the words felt clumsy, not the lecture she'd given a dozen times before. It's not safe, it's not real. It's I know, okay? I get it, he cut in. Voice sharp with the edge of a teenager desperate to end the conversation. She left without pushing further, but her heart kept racing. That bedsheet wasn't something generic. She'd bought it during a trip to Lahore, a one-of-a-kind print she'd never seen elsewhere, and the carved headboard. She had chosen that design herself when they'd renovated the bedroom. It was impossible to ignore, yet too disturbing to believe. At dinner, Adil sat across from her, laughing about a coworker's mistake, gesturing animatedly with his fork. She forced her lips into a smile, but kept catching herself glancing at his hands. The shape, the veins, the way his wrist turned like the image burned into her mind from that video. Zion barely spoke, pushing his food around the plate. She tried to shake it off, telling herself she was reading too much into an accidental similarity. People had similar furniture. Videos could be staged to look like anything. But then, after clearing the table, she walked past Zion's room and heard the faint tap of fingers on a phone. Her son's voice was low, urgent. I swear I didn't know it was him until... The words stopped abruptly, replaced by silence. Maya froze in the hallway, the chill rising up her spine, her hands numb. She wanted to push the door open, demand the rest of the sentence, but something stopped her. If she asked now, she wouldn't be ready for the answer. Later. Lying beside Adil, she stared at the ceiling while he scrolled through his phone, his thumb moving idly, his breathing steady. He kissed her temple before turning off the light. She closed her eyes but didn't sleep. The image from earlier replayed in her mind in merciless detail, the angle of the video, the soft hum in the background, the tiny scratch on the wall, exactly where theirs was. Every sound in the dark seemed amplified. Adil's steady breaths, the faint creak of the bed when he shifted, the tick-in clock on the dresser. She counted each second, her mind cycling between disbelief and the creeping certainty that what she had seen was not random at all. By morning, she had almost convinced herself it was her imagination, a cruel trick of familiarity. But then she caught Zion watching her over his cereal, a flash of guilt in his eyes before he looked down. Maya poured herself tea, her hands steady only because she willed them to be. She didn't know yet what she would do, but she knew one thing with bone-deep clarity. Whatever that video was, it wasn't going away, and neither was the unease it had planted inside her. Maya waited until the house fell silent, each creak of the settling walls amplifying her own unease. Adil's breathing from the bedroom was deep and steady. Zion's door shut tight down the hall. She slipped into her son's room, moving like a trespasser, and opened his laptop. The guilt burned in her chest, but her fingers kept going. Browser history filled the screen, innocent links, gaming sites, until she found the one that made her stop. It led to a grainy video, muted, cropped just enough to hide faces. Yet everything else screamed familiarity: the headboard, the slight tilt of the bedside lamp. And then there it was, a wristwatch glinting in low light, identical to the one Adil had worn every day for years, even to sleep. Her stomach clenched, heat rising up her throat. She slammed the laptop shut, more forcefully than intended, and stood still, listening for movement. The house stayed silent. She slipped back to bed but didn't close her eyes once. By morning, she was at Sarah's kitchen table, stirring sugar into tea she wouldn't drink. Sarah listened, her expression unreadable. "Before you decide anything," she said carefully, "make sure you're certain. Because if it's true, there's no way back." Maya nodded, but her mind was already pulling at loose threads. Adil had come home late, damp hair sticking to his forehead, smelling faintly of perfume she didn't own. The way Zion had been avoiding his father's gaze for weeks. That evening, she found Zion hunched over his desk, headphones on. She didn't knock. "Do you know who was in that video?" she asked, her tone leaving no room for evasion. His hand froze on the mouse. He pulled off the headphones slowly. "I think so," he said finally, his voice small. I recognized his voice, but I don't want to talk about it." His eyes darted away, his shoulders curling inward. She felt the weight of his fear and shame, realizing he was protecting her from something he thought might break her. When the house settled into its nightly rhythm, she sat on the edge of the bed while Adil showered. His phone was on the nightstand, screen lighting up with a muted notification. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she picked it up, thumb hesitating for just a second before swiping it open. Buried in a hidden folder were short clips, no faces. Just the same room, the same patterned sheet, the same unmistakable watch. In one, the camera caught a sliver of a mirror's edge, reflecting a blurred but telling image of Adil's face, his mouth close to the neck of a woman whose identity was obscured by shadow. Her breath came in shallow bursts, her body rigid with a mixture of rage and devastation. She placed the phone back exactly as it was, sat perfectly still as the shower stopped and Adil emerged, towel slung over his shoulders, smiling faintly before rummaging for clothes. She watched him as though he were a stranger who'd somehow wandered into her home. When the lights went out, she stayed awake, staring into the dark, listening to his breathing. Every memory, holidays, laughter, quiet evenings, seemed to shift, their colors draining away. She thought of Zion seeing the video first, of the sick confusion that must have swallowed him whole, of how heavy it must have been to keep it inside. By dawn, she had made a quiet decision. There would be no confrontation yet, not until she was ready. But she also knew that from this point forward, every word spoken in this house, every shared glance, would carry the weight of a truth neither man in her life knew she had already uncovered. Maya waited until the tension inside her was too heavy to carry in silence. When Adil came home that evening, she was ready, the phone in her hand, the clips cued. He'd barely had time to set his keys down before she pressed play, the muted footage filling the room with its ugly familiarity. His jaw tightened, eyes narrowing, and for a moment he seemed ready to deny everything. Then his shoulders dropped. "It was before things between us got bad," he said, as if that made it smaller, as if the timeline could blunt the betrayal. It meant nothing. The words slid off her like cold rain. A noise from the hallway broke the moment. Zion standing there, face pale, eyes darting between them. "I knew it was him," he said, voice cracking, "but I didn't know how to tell you." He was shaking, not from fear, but from the release of a secret he had carried too long. Maya reached for him, but he stepped back, his expression twisted. With shame, I wish I'd never seen it. Adil tried to speak, to reach for his son, but Zion flinched away, retreating into his room and slamming the door. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. Maya turned back to Adil, her decision already made. Get out. He stared at her as though she had just erased his entire life, his mouth opening, closing, opening again without finding words. She didn't wait. She walked past him, opened the front door, and stood there until he picked up his keys again and left. The night was long and silent, broken only by the creak of floorboards when Zion emerged for water but didn't. Look at her. She lay on the couch, the space beside her yawning wide and empty, a reminder that absence could be as heavy as presence. Weeks blurred. Adil moved into a rented flat across town. The explanations to relatives were vague. We need space. Things weren't working. No one asked directly, but Maya felt their curiosity like a draft under a closed door. Zion withdrew further, his voice now a rare visitor in the house. Sarah's visits were the only breaks in the heaviness. One afternoon, over coffee neither of them touched. She said, "Secrets don't just fade, Maya. If you don't talk to him about it, it'll rot inside both of you." Maya nodded but didn't answer. Some wounds didn't need prodding, they needed breathing space. It was Zion who finally broke the quiet. One evening, he sat at the kitchen table, staring at his untouched plate. "It's messed up," he said, not looking up. "I can't stop thinking about it. I can't stop hearing it in my head." She sat across from him, her hands folded tightly together. "It's not your fault," she told him, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "What happened is between your father and me. You didn't cause it. You didn't choose to see it." His eyes brimmed with something between anger and relief. "But I did see it. And I can't unsee it. I don't think I'll ever see people the same way again." She didn't try to fix the words or lighten them. She let them sit, heavy and real, between them. Eventually, he stood, muttered goodnight, and left her at the table. Later, she walked into the bedroom she had shared with Adil for more than a decade. The sheets from that video were still on the bed. She stripped them off in one swift movement, stuffing them into a garbage bag. The mattress lay bare, its surface cold under her palm. She lay down without covering herself, staring at the ceiling in the dark. The air felt different, sharper somehow. The truth had burned through the walls of her life, leaving gaps she didn't yet know how to fill, but at least it was no longer hidden. That, in its own bitter way, felt like the first step forward. There was no going back to the way things had been. Days began to run on a loop: wake, work, cook, sleep, but every moment was touched by an awareness that the family they once were had fractured beyond repair. Adil's name still came up in casual conversation with relatives, but it was always past tense, softened, as if speaking of someone who had moved far away. In truth, he was only a few miles across town, but that distance might as well have been a lifetime. Zion avoided talking about him. If the phone rang and it was Adil, he would leave it unanswered, sometimes sliding it across the table to Maya. Without a word, she didn't press. The air between them had shifted, still mother and son, but with an invisible wall of shared knowledge that neither wanted to touch too often. One afternoon, she caught sight of Adil in the supermarket. He was in the dairy aisle, looking at his phone, a half-empty basket hooked in his arm. For a moment, she just stood there, watching him as if he were a stranger, noticing details she had never considered before: the way his hair thinned at the crown, the slight slump in his posture. He looked up, saw her, and froze. There was no nod, no smile, just a subtle lowering of his gaze before he turned and walked the other way. At home. She didn't mention it to Zion. He had been in a better mood lately, occasionally laughing at something on his phone, spending more time in the living room instead of locked in his room. She didn't want to disturb that fragile improvement. But later that evening, she found him sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through old photos on his tablet. Family holidays, birthday dinners, candid shots of Adil laughing. "It's weird," Zion said without looking up, "how you can know someone your whole life and not really know them at all." She sat beside him, unsure whether to respond. Adil called that night. She answered, holding the phone just far enough away to dull his voice. He spoke of missing them, of wanting to meet, of making amends. She didn't say yes or no, only that she'd think about it. When she hung up, Zion asked, "Are you going to see him?" She shook her head. "Not yet." It was the truth. The thought of being in the same room with him felt like reopening a wound that had only just started to scar. Weeks stretched into months. The calls became less frequent. When they did speak, it was clipped, practical, discussing bills, school, schedules, nothing else. The intimacy they'd once had was gone, replaced by a transactional politeness that felt stranger than silence. One evening, Zion surprised her by saying, "I think I'm ready to see him." She studied his face, searching for hesitation, but found only resolve. "Okay," she said. "I'll arrange it." The meeting was set for a Saturday afternoon in a quiet cafe neither of them had been to before. Maya didn't go in. She sat in the car outside, watching through the window as father and son spoke. Zion's posture was tense at first, but gradually he leaned forward, nodding occasionally. After an hour, they emerged. Adil gave a small wave before walking off in the opposite direction. Zion got into the car without a word. How was it?" she asked. "It was fine," he said after a long pause. "I don't forgive him, but I needed to see him." She nodded, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. That night, after Zion went to bed, she returned to the bedroom. Garbage bag with the old sheets was still in the corner, tied tight, forgotten in the rush of days. She carried it outside and placed it by the curb. Standing there under the streetlight, she realized it wasn't just about removing a piece of fabric, it was about discarding a version of her life she could no longer live in. When she went back inside, the house felt strangely lighter. Not healed, not whole, but lighter. She lay in bed alone, the empty space beside her no longer an open wound, but a quiet reminder that she had survived something she hadn't thought she could. And survival, she realized, was its own kind of ending.